Muy buenos días, les doy la más cordial bienvenida y los invito a tomar asiento para poder comenzar. Thank you very much for being here this morning. I would like to start by sincerely thanking Mariana Campero, Director of COMEXI, for organizing this event, and Roberto Salinas, who made it possible. Thank you very much, Roberto. I also want to express my gratitude to Luis de la Calle for moderating this conversation. Thank you very much, Luis. Today we are truly honored to welcome Dr. Deirdre McCloskey, one of the foremost scholars in the United States in the fields of economics, economic history, and the philosophy of liberalism. First of all, I would like to share with you some of the key aspects of Dr. McCloskey's resume. She is Distinguished Professor of Economics, of History, and Professor of English and of Communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She has written 16 books. Her most recognized work today is her great trilogy on the bourgeois era. By the way, the first volume of this outstanding trilogy was published in Spanish by the Fondo de Cultura Económica under the title Las Virtudes Burguesas, Ética para la Era del Comercio. She has edited 7 books and published around 370 academic articles. Dr. McCloskey defines herself in her Twitter profile as postmodern, quantitative, literary, ex-Marxist, economist, historian, and progressive Episcopalian. I will also add that she is a brave woman who has not hesitated to break molds and shatter barriers to be faithful to her convictions. If I had to define Dr. McCloskey, maybe a fitting word would be iconoclast. Despite being an outstanding Ivy League economist, she was never shy to point out that her peers' desire to attain full scientific objectivity was ineffective. She knew that what the profession of economics needed was less mathematics and more emphasis on persuasion, stories, and rhetoric, as one review of her books mentioned. One cannot help but wonder what would have happened if the mainstream economics listened to this advice decades ago. Perhaps more people would have understood the value of economic freedom. Perhaps economic liberalism would not be suffering the assault of populism, or at least it would have more and better rhetorical weapons to fight back. Perhaps the narratives of economic progress will be more appealing than the narratives of economic failure. Dr. McCloskey has not limited herself to prescribe better narratives. She has made a passionate defense of economic liberalism, not only in a pragmatic term, but also from an ethical and human perspective. As she points out, the most important element that explains the great enrichment, the extraordinary 200-year period of global economic expansion, was innovism, defined as the liberty to let people have a vote to implement their ideas for commercially tested development. At a time when economic freedom is severely questioned around the world, the lucid ideas of Deirdre McCloskey become an excellent reference to see reality with different lenses. I am certain that we will leave this conversation with new ideas to defend liberty, innovation, and progress. Dr. McCloskey, welcome again to Mexico. And as we used to say to our true friends, mi casa es su casa. Thank you very much.
Buenos días a todos. Welcome back to Mexico, Professor McCloskey. Thank you, Mariana Campero, for the invitation, and Jaime for hosting this important conversation with Professor McCloskey. Thank you also, Roberto Salinas, for bringing Deirdre McCloskey back to Mexico. She was here last year. I was privileged to accompany her in the presentation of the Spanish version of the first book of the trilogy on the virtues of the bourgeois faith. And I think there is no better time to have a discussion on liberalism and a narrative that we need to develop to win a debate for the modern country. We have now a new president in Mexico, as you know, that won in the campaign last year based on three arguments. Argument one was the country is worse off, in spite of any objective view of Mexico. Will tell you that Mexico is much better off today than 30 years ago. No matter where you go, you might go to the poorest regions of Mexico, and if you took a picture today and compared a picture of the same place 30 years ago, you would find improvement. You would be hard-pressed to find pictures where the country is worse off, even in the regions where we have significant violence linked to drug trafficking and other social problems. But in spite of that, he made a convincing campaign to average Mexicans that the country is worse off. That was the first argument. Second argument was profits are illegitimate. Wealth creation is the result of collusion with the government and abuse of power and privileges, and therefore private sector participation in wealth creation should be prohibited. And the third aspect, the third argument that he made, is related to the two before, is the regime is completely corrupt and unethical. And therefore in Mexico we need a deep transformation where honesty is the guiding light, and where we have to get away with the private sector doing a lot of things that it's doing now that should be done only by the government. And he also made one more argument, that the problems of Mexico were caused, particularly those related to violence, by the state and capitalists. This is not unique to Mexico. I mean, the rise of populism that Edna made reference to is a worldwide phenomenon. we've been losing the argument that markets need expansion. And the best instrument we have within the government today to fight against this is that the chief of staff of the president presents himself as an ambassador of entrepreneurs, as opposed to an ambassador of markets. So, I mean, if we could choose a source of inspiration to develop a new narrative, to defend liberalism, Professor McCloskey is probably the best. It is an irony that López Obrador feels that he inherits the tradition of Benito Juárez, liberal president of Mexico of the 19th century. And Benito Juárez said a phrase that is in a statue in front of the Watergate in Washington, D.C. And that the phrase of the statue is respect of other people's rights is peace. And if you read McCloskey's work, you will find that her main conclusion is that the respect of other people's rights and other people's well-being and their ideas is competitiveness. So it's, Benito Juárez was a liberal. López Obrador deep down is a conservative, but he wears the robes of a liberal to present a very conservative program. So, I mean, how can you help we poor Mexicans develop a narrative to counter what we are facing, which is a tremendous challenge?
Well, I'm from the United States and I'm here to help you. Hasn't worked too well in the relationship between our two countries. We stole half of Mexico fair and square.
We're getting this back an apartment at a time.
I agree. I'm from Chicago, which is now very largely sorry, I stuttered. A Mexican city that Hispanics generally are the largest minority in Chicago. So you could get excellent food in the Hispanic parts of Chicago. No, I can hardly, in the era of Donald Trump, whom I'm going to call from now on Individual One, because that's what he's called in the indictments of his fantastically corrupt regime. I can hardly come and say, oh, well, learn how to be liberal from the United States. So far from God, so close to the United States of America, as you say. But I think we have to make the case for leaving people alone to innovate in small ways and large. And we have to keep making the case because it works. It's so obvious. I've argued that historically, in the last couple of centuries, it's not the government that made us well-to-do, and I completely agree that in the last 30 years, worldwide, things have improved, not because the government is selecting winners, not because the government is nationalizing the oil industry as in Venezuela, but because of individual enterprise. Now, it's not just the enterprise at the highest command levels of the economy. I'm in favor of that too, but it's not just the big bankers and the big manufacturers that I'm talking about. It's ordinary people in their own lives, able to move to work, able to open a hairdressing salon in the neighborhood, if she thinks that's a good idea. I desperately need her and so on. That too is part of this respect and dignity for the projects of other people, as long as they don't interfere violently with other people's projects. And I found a surprise, just last night, I found a startling articulation of this simple principle. Leave people alone, inspire them by saying, you're worthy, and you can innovate, invest on your own in, of all places, 100-year solitude, which shamefully I haven't read before, by Garcia Marquez. I was just in Colombia a couple of weeks ago, so I assigned myself the job of reading this strange and fascinating book, and I come across the following sentence. I have to put my glasses on to read it. Unfortunately, I can't read it in Spanish, primarily because I don't know Spanish, and also because when I try to speak in a foreign language, I stutter very badly. Say, by the way, before I reveal that this lifelong socialist, Garcia Marquez, in fact, had secretly some liberal ideas. I want to tell you a joke that I made up, a Spanish joke. It goes like this. A person who knows 3 languages is called trilingual. A person who knows 2 is called bilingual. A person who knows 1 is called una gringa. But anyway, he says, or the hero of the book says about this fictional town, this magical town. Well, yes, that's right. Macondo. He says to the magistrate who has been sent by the Colombian government to, I don't know, establish order in the town where there hasn't been any disorder. The hero of the book says, no one here was upset. No, my eyes are very good. No one was upset that the government had not helped them. We did this by ourselves. On the contrary, they were happy that up until then, the government had let them grow in peace. So let them grow in peace. It's crucial to understand that innovation doesn't come from the government. Bad ideas come from the government in abundance. But and some of them are good, a few of them are good, but not many, because they aren't tested by this profit that Obrador doesn't like. Profit is not a tax. Profit is not just some arbitrary figure that we add to the cost of goods in order that rich people can be rich. It's a signal. When something is profitable in the market, ordinary people who buy the stuff are saying, let's have more of that. And when it's profit will say, ugh, no more of that. So it's a central planning mechanism. Let me make one more remark on this. What's the inefficiency of socialism? Or even quasi-socialism, of very complicated regulations, and taking over industries and making them part of the government. What would you say? 50%? I'd say that sounds about right. 50%, certainly if you compare East Germany and West, in the days when there were to, by actual experiment, it seems that 50% wouldn't be a bad estimate. If you take North and South Korea, it's more like 90%, but let's go with 50%. So that's what the cost of socialism is. Now suppose you view profit as a tax, as just this arbitrary imposition. Well, what's its size relative to national income? 15%? 10%? So there's the argument. Even if you think of profit as meaningless, it's full of meaning. It's full of meaning of saying what people want. Even if you take that view, hands down, as we say in English, easily, socialism loses.
I think we can convince people about the benefits that the markets and liberty can bring, but I mean, if you ask the population at large, you may get the impression that they agree with those.
Well,
I mean, how do we go about convincing people
well,
that the profits are something that's potentially possible?
Well, it's kind of like growing up. And it's hard because the Argentinians, for example, have never grown up.
They've grown down.
Since they've gotten more childish ever since Perón. They believe that if we tax you to subsidize me, and tax me to subsidize you, we'll both be better off. Oh. So, I suppose the problem is, as Bastiat, the great French liberal in the middle of the 19th century, said, socialism is the conviction that everyone can live off taxing everyone else.
Now, if we take a look at your first book of the trilogy, we can make the case that prudence, which is profit-seeking in a way,
Yeah, it is.
is a virtue that if you take it to an excess, will have a negative impact, which is, I think, López Obrador's argument.
Yeah,
How can we, should the private sector in Mexico make a case that we should have other virtues and not only
Of course.
profit-seeking?
Of course, and you do. One does. That was kind of the burden of the book. It started these three volumes, which I hope the University of Chicago Press will issue someday in a boxed set, like Harry Potter. I'll die happy. I won't die rich, but I'll die happy. I was in that first volume, which came out in 2006, I was trying to defend what I eventually started to call innovism, which is a much better word than capitalism. Capitalism is a very misleading word. But in any case, my argument was that as business actually operates, really actually operates, other virtues than prudence, but prudence is perhaps the chief, the leading virtue of a business person, just as courage must be the leading virtue of a firefighter or a soldier, and love must be the leading virtue of a saint. The other virtues of inside the enterprise, inside the business. If you treat your employees with contempt and sort of a haughty, aristocratic attitude, it's not going to work out very well. In any case, you don't want to. This idea that business people are exploiting the poor or who they hire or whatever is the core belief of our socialist friends, and I have lots of socialist friends. The other Marx, Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx was a famous American comedian in the 1930s in film. He had been involved, he went to film. And he was fantastically successful. He did these crazy films, Night at the Opera, and other wonderful, insane with his brothers. He had a friend who was a communist. I think in the 1930s I probably would have ended up as a communist because things were very bad. But anyway, his friend George, the communist, came to Groucho, who had a cruel sense of humor. And he said to Groucho Marx, my family is starving, I really need a job, you're a big deal in Hollywood, can't you get me a job? And Groucho knew well that George was a communist, said, George, I can't do that to you. I don't want to exploit you. And sent him away. So, that's the basic problem. To think that mutually advantageous exchange, I hire you to clean my house or to fix my hair, please, or to be my banker. And I do it voluntarily, and both of us are made better off by this. This idea that this fact is deeply evil and exploitative is the basic thing that divides liberals and indeed some conservatives. Divides liberals from socialists and indeed some conservatives. I have a friend named Jack Amarillo, who's a Marxist. And he's a wonderful guy. He's very intelligent and he's...
Groucho Marxist or Karl?
No, he's a Karl Marxist. But he's he's a postmodern Marxist, if you can feature that. And Jack is a splendid man. And he says to me, Deirdre, I hate the market. And I say, Jack, you don't hate the market. Your house is filled with antique furniture that you enthusiastically bargain for and buy in a market. And he says, yes, that's true, but still, I hate the market.
Well, I think there's a very important point that firms and the way they behave, not only in terms of profit maximizing, but in terms of treating people well, not exploiting.
The virtue of justice and temperance.
And optimism, and
hope and faith.
And innovation, all that is true. But they would argue to you that the evidence is quite clear. They exploit workers. Why do I know that? Well, because wages are down.
Yeah.
According to this, that.
But they're not.
And inequality is way up.
Yeah, that's
so. Why don't we? Tell us a little about both these things: the wage paradox and
in the first place, the wages are not down; they're up. And the problem, I don't know these statistics in your country, but I do know them in mine. And there's this thing you see on the TV all the time, wages are flat. Now there are many things wrong with that. Probably the most important thing that's wrong with it is that the quality of many of the goods that people actually buy, like housing and air conditioning and automobiles and smartphones, has gone up. And that's inadequately captured in the price index. I've spoken to the head of the Consumer Price Index, and she agrees, because every economist who talks to her, she's an economist, says the same thing. Why can't you do a better job in capturing quality improvements? I mean, think of your smartphone. The first one I bought was too smart for me. I had to abandon it. And the one I have now has substantially higher IQ than I have, but I still use it. It doesn't do the washing up. It doesn't actually clean the plates off and clean them, but it does everything else. No one needs a flashlight to torch anymore because it's on your cell phone. If you don't know how, learn to use it. And automobiles. Here's my favorite simple example: tires, automobile tires. If you're of a certain age, and I certainly am, you remember in the 60s, and 70s, 50s.
You know how to change it.
I know how to change a tire. I sure do. I'm really good at changing tires. But you don't have to anymore.
Well, young people have no idea.
They have no idea. Tires used to last 4,000 miles, 5 maybe. Now they seem to last forever. They're immortal.
You know what the problem with that is, with the fact that the cell phone is now a torch?
Yeah.
You know, that pushes unemployment.
Yeah, you bet.
People get fired because
Yeah, that's right. Well,
in the candle business they're gone.
I have an essay. We're haunted. Well, lots of people are haunted. I was talking to a friend at my club this very point. He's a publisher, and he's worried, haunted by the technological unemployment that's supposed to come over all of us. And I pointed out, as an economic historian, once we were all farmers. Everyone in this room had ancestors who were peasants and hoed the land, probably didn't even plow it. Our ancestors were very poor and they were farmers. In the United States in 1800, over 80% of people were on farms. In 1900, it was still 1/3 on farms. Now it's 2%. What? Did that create mass unemployment? No. Once there were telephone operators, women with a microphone talking to you on the phone. Once there were elevator operators, right? You remember?
We still have some in the Mexican government.
I know. I'm not surprised. But see, that's the point. The forces that make for employment in the government, sometimes good. I mean, I'm glad there are some police, although we have a problem in Chicago with the police that is somewhat similar to the one you have here with the police. But anyway, so I'm not against government, I'm not an anarchist, but how you decide who to employ at what job in the government is very far from the principle. And what I'm going to stop calling the private sector and start calling the voluntary sector, because that's a much better word. Private makes it sound like, secret. Private, they're extracting blood from the workers, storing it in the back room. And then as far as inequality is concerned, substantial inequality has fallen steadily since 1800. Our ancestors, our common ancestors in 1800, if you want to see inequality, think of Mexico or the United States in 1800, where there were some people with their haciendas and they were the lords and the agents of the Spanish colonial government. And they were fancy, although they got smallpox still. And they did.
It's coming back.
Yeah, I know. And, certainly measles is in Oregon. and then there were our ancestors, unspeakably poor. If you look like the English comedians, Monty Python, kind of their view of the Middle Ages is how was true. Peasants eating dirt, literally eating dirt because of certain kinds of malnutrition. And now, poor people in Mexico have a roof over their head, substantial roof, have a vehicle of some sort, a motorcycle, which allows them to go further to compete for jobs and gives them more employers competing for hiring them. So it's altogether much better. So this, I've got a long review, 50 pages if you can stand it, of Thomas Piketty's book that made such a stir in 2013 about, and as he himself points out, the only countries that have actually, according to him, become more unequal are Britain, the United States, and Canada. For some reason, he then ignores Canada, and the Canadians say, yeah, as usual.
Well, that's positive.
Yeah, I know. Maybe being ignored is better than attracting attention. But in his own country, in France, inequality has not increased. But he said, no, but wait, it's going to. It's inevitable. This exploitative capitalism, right? That's the word he used. It's going to get more unequal. And it's not really. As I said, in the important things, we're more equal. Access to education. Our common ancestors, certainly my Irish ancestors, couldn't read. My Norwegian ancestors could, but not my Irish ancestors. So, the problem with populism is that it's based on fear. In our individual one, it says, the Mexicans are coming. The Mexicans are coming. Be fearful. Now this is crazy. Or in Hungary, Orbán says, the Muslims are coming. And that's so absurd. Do you think those people coming from Syria want to live in Hungary? They would have to learn to speak Hungarian. No adult wants to learn to speak Hungarian. It's too hard. It hasn't even got gender. It's completely crazy language. They're on their way to Germany. Yet, so fear. Be fearful. And that's the basis of populist politics. And from the left, it's be fearful of, and I hear this all the time, the international corporations. My God, the international corporations, they're trying to sell you running shoes. I mean, how terrifying is that? They want you to voluntarily buy New Balance running shoes. I mean, this is appalling. And their power. I'm going to do an essay for Reason magazine on this vocabulary. Power. People speak of market power, by which they mean that Google has a lot of customers. Huh? Power is about violence. Power is about the monopoly of violence that governments have. That's where power is. Or the monopoly of violence that a husband has over her wife in earlier times. Thank God, in your country and mine, we're getting out of that. I won't say we're all the way out of it.
Go slowly.
Yeah.
In terms of inequality, the left has always argued in favor of equality results.
Yeah.
The
that's
right responded to that saying, well, we need equality of opportunities.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it the right, because the real conservatives, the reactionaries, don't want equality of any sort, opportunity or results. To hell with that. They want to be, the chief and all the
But let's put it this way.
Liberals.
Neoclassical economists answer equality of opportunity.
That's right.
But Professor McCloskey, I think, gave the best answer, which is, in my view, equality of respect
Yeah, that's
as
right.
the foundation
I agree.
for growth.
I know. And
How do we sell that idea that respecting people equally
that's
is what makes a country wealthy and modern?
well, in the first place, that's what people want. They don't want to be rich. Hey, if I get rich, I won't send the check back. But being rich is only a part, in most people's minds, I think, unless you're a miser of some sort. It's respect that you want. Your maid wants respect. If you treat her with contempt, you're violating the golden rule, and you shouldn't. So that's what people want. But then furthermore, if you give ordinary people respect, you say, yes, you can start the hairdressing salon. Yes, you can open a bank if that's what's needed, or if you think that's what's needed. Then miraculously, in the last 2 centuries, innovation happens. I mean, look around you. This carpet, this lovely, inexpensive carpet, is impossible in the 1700s. Electric lights, has it ever occurred to you, we now have gone back to living in caves? Because that's what our houses are. Interior houses are caves in interior rooms. But of course we have lights, so it doesn't matter.
We paint this on the walls and everything.
Paintings on the walls and everything, that's right, exactly. Yeah. In fact, we reproduce the caves of Lascaux in our windows. If we open these, let's not, but if we open these, we'll find enormous pieces of plate glass that were impossible to make before 1950. So now we make doors out of glass. I mean, what an amazing thing. Okay, and then there are organizational changes, like containerization, which involves no science. Just, hey, look, suppose we have steel boxes and pile them up on ships and see what happens. So the innovation comes from giving people respect. As Adam Smith said, and I always cross myself. Adam Smith, when I'm in an Orthodox country, I do it the other way. Adam Smith, the blessed Adam Smith, the saint, son Adam, said we should adopt the obvious and simple plan of natural liberty, the liberal plan, the word he used, of equality, liberty, and justice, by which he mentioned social equality, this deep quality of respect for people, and Adam Smith was an egalitarian. Liberty of opportunity, open the hairdressing salon or move somewhere to get a better job for your family, and equality before the law, before the courts, before the power of violence exercised by the government. So it all, it hangs together, and it's not about being nasty to your employees or your maid. It's not about exploitation. It's about opportunity.
I published an article in the US and in Mexico last week called Extortionomics,
Yeah.
the economics of extortion, and
Okay.
I'll give you a copy in documents. And the argument I make in that article, I'm working on a book on extortionomics, is that the main reason Mexico doesn't grow as we should is that
Although you've grown pretty well, as you said.
well. I
Not
mean,
too bad.
we could grow much more.
Much more easily.
If the small and medium-sized firms did not encounter so much.
It is the way.
The small and medium-sized firms
Yeah.
did not encounter as much extortion as they get from a lot of people.
Yeah.
So getting rid of this network of extortions
Yeah.
will lead to
Well,
flourishing.
and of course, the problem is that there are these kind of freelance violence people. The cop on the beat, the policeman or the local mafia boss or something, extorting people. But then there's the extortion of excessive regulation, which is what gives power to the policeman on the beat. You remember this amazing fella in Tunisia who burned himself to death. He was a street vendor of food, and he was just being extorted every day by the cops. If you've seen, you should see the great American long-form show called The Wire, which is about corruption in Baltimore, which, by the way, is a hick town. There's a character. He's an addict. He's a drug addict. He supports his habit by buying up toiletries, toothpaste and so on, and buying low and selling high. So he goes around to the shopping cart in the store, and he sells in his neighborhood. And it's perfectly peaceful exchange. And then some gangster decides to steal his money every day. That's extortion. That's the extortion economy. And so we need a government to establish, to keep the private, as it were, the private, they're involuntary, so they're not voluntary, but the private thugs, of course, I agree with that. But we also need to keep the government from becoming thugs.
Two more questions and then we'll go to the audience. Let me make a positive argument in favor of populism and Lopez Obrador.
Okay, that'll be interesting.
To see your reaction. One is his insistence on ethical behavior. He would like to draft a moral constitution.
I agree.
Second one is, I think Mexican private sector has been in the past too close to government.
Yeah, well, I agree with that too.
The fact that Lopez Obrador has an agenda that is contrary to many of the principles of the private sector is maybe an opportunity to distance the voluntary sector from government. And if we work on those two angles, the ethical behavior in everything we do, and the distance between the voluntary sector and the government, Lopez Obrador might end up making a contribution to Mexico.
Well, I think that's not crazy. It's not completely local. The problem is the government is the source of this ethical education. Now, wait a second, that's a little bit strange. Although very common in conservative circles. It's one of the main conservative arguments that we, the existing rulers, are going to help you by raising you up as good Catholics or good this or good that. I think the real source of ethical convictions comes from below, not from above. It comes from your mother. Say, don't lie. Be good. there are two versions of the Golden Rule. Hillel of Babylon, a Jewish sage of the 1st century BCE, spoke of it, this Golden Rule, in negative terms. He says, do not do unto others as you would not want to have done to yourself. And that's a kind of masculine, leave me alone version. And then another Jewish sage, about a century afterwards, you may have heard of, Jesus of Nazareth, put the Golden Rule in positive terms. Do unto others as you would want to have done unto you. Don't be a good Samaritan. Don't pass by on the other side, as the Bible puts it. Be nice. And that's sort of feminine. Be actively good. And those are things we learn from our mothers, fathers too. We learn the first from our father, the second from our mother. We learn it from movies, from novels, from gossip, from the rumore, as the Italians say, of ordinary life. Yeah, that's where we learn what is good and what is bad. Not from, I'm sorry to say, the church necessarily, or the government, these big, encompassing, authoritarian institutions. You know, there's this amazing development among Southern Baptists in the United States that's just broke as a story, which is that, like the Catholic priests, a very tiny group, but enough of them that it's stained the Roman Catholic Church in the United States and Ireland, and soon in Poland. Their ministers have been abusing people too. And that's such a, well, it's so predictable in a way that an authoritarian top-down institution will be used as an instrument of individual profit or lust. And that's the trouble with the idea that the government is a good source of ethical education.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Catholic and the Church, because that relates to the final question I had. I mean, reading your book, or your books, many of them. You should buy them. Buy the one from Fondo Cultura, because I don't think they'll publish the other two. we have a new Fondo Cultura.
I've asked them to do another. It's been one of the later books has been translated into Chinese, and by the intervention of this liberal saint here, Tom Palmer, right there, he's the liberal saint. Thank you, Tom. And it started with 3 translators, and ended with 1, and my theory is that the first 2
They're in jail.
committed suicide, because it's hard to translate.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the 5 R's as the key for true development. Reading,
Yeah,
which is Gutenberg.
yeah,
Reformation, which is Luther.
yeah,
Revolt,
yeah,
revolution,
yeah.
and maybe I'm missing one, but
The revaluation of the bourgeoisie.
yeah.
So, and in a way, that's the most important one. It's not so much that the middle class changed. I think they've always been good and bad, the way ordinary humans are. I mean, come on, we all have problems. But the attitude of the rest of society towards entrepreneurs, large and small, changed. And boy, you can see it happening in the 18th century in Britain and in the 17th century in Holland.
Being a Catholic country, Mexico, with strong institutions, and looking at Martin Luther and William of Orange, which are enemies of Spain and Mexico.
Yes.
Can a Catholic country like Mexico truly develop?
Of course it can.
Or is it antithetical to these 5 R's?
I don't think Protestantism in doctrine is what was important. It wasn't that, this is Max Weber's argument, one of the great books of social science ever. Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, published in 1905. It's a wonderful book, but it's wrong. And everyone who's looked into it seriously agrees that it's wrong. Its theology is wrong. Its sociology is wrong. Its economics is wrong. Wrong. But what did happen in the Protestant Reformation is precisely what we were just talking about. Luther's doctrine of the priesthood of all believers, which, by the way, he drew back from after 1525. He got nervous about it because the peasants said, "Oh, okay, we can be the priests." No, you can't. But anyway, the radical Reformation, the Anabaptists and eventually the English Quakers, they took, and the Congregationalists, they took over their own spiritual life in the way that the Catholic Church in Mexico frequently has in its actual history, as against its theoretical history as being wholly governed by the Pope in Rome. So it's the autonomy and dignity of individuals which was elevated by the Reformation, as by reading, as by one doctrine that Luther had that was very important, but it had been important in other attempts at Reformation, was reading. But at the time he had the printing press, whereas earlier attempts to do the same thing didn't have the printing press, which, by the way, is a Chinese invention. It wasn't invented in Germany. So, but then the revolt against Spain in Holland, the English Civil War, sometimes called the Revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, all gave people confidence, ordinary people confidence, that they could have charge of their own lives. And following this amazing sentence in the book by a socialist.
All right, well, we have 25 minutes for questions. Why don't we do 3 at a time so that we can have more?
No, I don't like that. Here's what I'll do. I'll promise to be brief.
All right, so they will do 1 at a time.
You promise to be brief, I'll promise to be brief. We'll see if this promising actually works.
So we'll begin with Agustin here. Mike.
Thank you, Professor McCloskey. So having campaigned on some of these issues, one of the most succinct ways of putting it is your freedom ends where mine begins.
Exactly. That's Hillel.
Yeah, and actually that translates well in Spanish. But I'd like to go to the issue from the brain to the gut, right?
Yeah.
There's this cult of stupidity that sort of is underneath all of what we're seeing right now
Yes.
in the United States and Mexico. And it has to do with there's a rejection of expertise and of experience.
You bet.
And anything that sounds like that will be rejected prima facie, right?
Yeah.
So you need government, right? You need government to be, and for it to be effective, you need leadership and intelligence.
Yeah.
And we are here because at the end of the day, we weren't up to the task. We became complacent, and we sort of we conceded the point. And this was most clearly seen with Hillary Clinton in 2016, when she conceded the point with respect to NAFTA. And that was
wasn't that disgraceful?
It was disgraceful, and it has continued, right? And so I just want to come to that conceding the point, because there is a constituency out there, but we have yet to reach out to it, and we have yet to identify it precisely, and 2, we have yet to reach out to it. And I think that's the original sin of all of this.
Well, but look, The expertise was misused by economists. I'll speak for my own profession, for example. For the last 100 years, economics has increasingly defined itself as a policy science. And to make the joke, I'm from economics, I'm here to help you. And it's unethical right from the beginning. My friend Bob Frank, who's at Cornell, said to me, nudging, you know about nudging in the United States, this idea by Cass Sunstein and others. We're going to nudge you. We're going to secretly get you to sign up to save for your old age and things like that. And Bob says to me, don't you understand, Deirdre? That's paternalistic libertarianism. And I said, Bob, what are you talking about? That's like military intelligence or academic administration. It's a contradiction in terms. It makes no sense. So that's an example of this misuse. And it all comes from this idea that the monopoly of violence should be turned to making us better off. It should be smaller. Leave us alone.
¿Qué más? ¿Hay más? ¿Questions?
Good. I want to hear a female voice, because it's always the guys.
Well, here one is.
Yeah.
I'm Nadine, and I've been living in Mexico for 22 years, a member of COMEXI. I was raised in Canada, and...
Oh, Canada. It's hockey night in Canada.
Yes. So I often comment to my Mexican husband that I don't speed when I'm in Canada because I know the consequences.
Yeah.
If I go over 110 kilometers an hour,
Yeah.
it's $96
Sure.
for every 10 kilometers. I know it, I memorized it, I've been living here for 22 years, and
Sure.
I still know what the law is. I know what the fine is
Yeah.
for throwing a can
Yeah.
on the street.
Yeah.
And yet I never felt that there was a big brother.
No, I agree with you.
So, I mean, I'm here because I believe in liberalism. I am a
Yeah, yeah.
liberal at heart.
Yeah.
However, how much is too much of that government interference? How is it that I remember that, and I know that, but I never saw them or felt them?
Well, it's a puzzle. Why the long, thin nation to the north of the big, fat nation has managed to do things like what you're saying, to get people to internalize the libertarianism
Yes.
of the form, in particular of the Hillel form. Leave me alone. But, you know, internalize in the sense that we don't want people going 200 kilometers an hour in a school zone. We all agree. And in Canada, it's done. You know, as you know, the United States has a libertarian tradition of leave me alone or I'll shoot you. Whereas Canada doesn't. I mean, you pass from Detroit to Windsor, and the murder rate falls to 1/7 of what it is. Same racial composition, that's not it. So please bottle Canadianism and send it to the United States and to Mexico. We could both use some of that.
Here in Mexico, at least for the younger generations, I believe, when you speak about liberalism, people think exactly of that picture over there, where inequality is really physical, and they think about what's happening here.
Yeah,
Rich people having breakfast,
yeah, yeah.
speaking about it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
They relate to neoliberalism,
Yeah.
which is related to, is almost used as an insult here in
Yeah, I
Mexico.
know it is.
And I believe that younger generations want to find a new way of thinking that is more just, more egalitarian,
Yeah,
and fights exactly that.
yeah,
Which I
well,
believe is true. It's not true, but how do you get that message to younger generations that think liberalism relates exactly to
well,
what doesn't?
in Latin America, the word liberal has been captured by conservatives. This is true all over the place. I mean, here I am. I don't speak Spanish or Portuguese, but I'm an expert on Latin America. I'm telling you. But in my own country, where I am something of an expert, the word has been taken over by the left. But recently, the conservatives have managed to scare those so-called liberals, namely the slow socialists in the United States, into abandoning that word. And now they've taken on the word progressive, which if it's fine with me, they can have it as long as they don't mind being associated with compulsory sterilization, which was one of the main policies of American progressives. But okay, the word should be liberal, and we should insist on it. And we should explain to people that liberal means a non-slave society. From Latin, liber, meaning a non-slave. That's what it meant in the Roman world, and that meaning, that simple meaning, can be applied to all the illiberalisms of men over women, of straight people over gays, of those white over black, all the hierarchies. And that'll appeal to them. Get the word neo out of it, because there's nothing neo about it. It was first articulated clearly in the 18th century, and then applied, most particularly in Latin America, in a kind of slightly strange form in the 19th century, and in Mexico in particular. I was a colleague and friend of Charles Hale, who is a great student of liberalism in Mexico, and then trying to teach the kids, well, how socialism has actually worked out. I mean, the coverage of the Venezuelan catastrophe is so irritating because journalists from the United States tend to treat it as though it were a hurricane that just suddenly descended on poor Venezuela. That's why they have hyperinflation and shortages and people starving. And they never mention the word socialism. And then try to get them beyond the kind of schoolyard ethics of that's not fair. It's not fair in this sense, in this simple-minded sense, that you're more intelligent than I am, as I'm certain is the case. For example, you know more languages than I do. Una gringa. Try to get them to understand that equality is not in itself a good thing. We trade with each other because we're not the same. If we were all the same, there'd be no point in, if we all had the same opinions, same skills, we wouldn't trade, we'd all be self-sufficient. So, it's a hard road. Have them read Adam Smith.
Hay otras situaciones de otras.
Good. Oh no, I thought it was going to be, oh, it is going to be a woman.
I think that one of the problems here in Mexico is that the new generations and also the old ones, we have seen a lot of cronyism here in Mexico.
Yeah, of course.
And I think Mexico is actually rated as one of the most important economies in cronyism, as the economist measures it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great obstacle in order to advance liberalism, because
Well, I agree.
sometimes liberals became very cronies. So
Yeah.
how do we start with this problem? I think there's a lot of anger.
Yeah, well, I have the same anger. Charles Koch, it should be pronounced Koch, but he doesn't like that. Charles Koch has a whole section of his institute. He's one of the Koch brothers. And it's against cronyism, against government corruption that he would benefit financially from. And that's what you need. You need people to call out the use of the government as an instrument of private gain. And I can't offer you any practical suggestions, but one thing to do is to join enthusiastically with Obrador. Say, yes, you're right, absolutely, I agree with you. Let's go after crony capitalism. And then maybe the left and the liberals can, I don't know, enact laws, although those often don't work, but do things against cronyism. The best thing you could do, now it's not going to happen, but the best thing you could do here in the United States would be to make the government smaller, much smaller. Instead of 30 or 40% of national income going through the government, bring it down to 10. And then it wouldn't be worth capture. But, that's nice, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Hello, my name is Claudia. My question is, what do you think about Douglas North and the theory of institutions in the terms that people act according to incentives?
Yeah, I know.
Should
That's what
we
he said.
change incentives and it's more that approach instead of ideology?
Look, I'm an economist. If I say that incentives don't matter, they take my card away. So, yes, incentives matter.
Like Big Ben Navarro's
Yeah, I
PhD
know.
from Harvard.
Exactly. I'm going to turn my Harvard degree back in because Peter Navarro, the main advisor to Individual One on trade, has a Harvard PhD. And, this is disgusting. But let's see, I've lost track of what's.
Douglas North. He was
So Douglas North, yeah, I got a book that I've submitted to the University of Chicago Press attacking Douglas North. So I got, have you got 9 hours? I can tell you what's wrong with you. But the basic problem is that Doug, he's a sweet man, he's a wonderful man. The basic problem is just what you said, that it is straightforward, orthodox, neoclassical, Marx-U economics, Samsonian, Gary Becker Friedman, in drag, in institutionalist drag. It's deeply wrong. The way you change institutions is by changing ethics. As I said, from the ground up. What your mother tells you, what the movies tell you, that's ideology. And as I got clearer and clearer as I wrote these 3 books, it's ideology that changed. Starting in the 18th century, but especially in the 19th, people started to accept the results of mutually advantageous exchange, to accept the results of free trade, which is the same thing, and to accept the innovation. Now, all of that is denied by, I'm not going to call them protectionists anymore. I'm going to call them favorists, because they favor this you over her, or him over her.
The challenge is, of course, to use the shock of the López Obrador presidency in Mexico to inject ethics in what we do in institutions.
Well, and there, as you describe it, I didn't know about his program. It probably came up a couple of days ago in his need to majesté, as the French used to say, the bed of majesty, where the king would be literally in bed and people would come and talk to him. And apparently that's what this guy does too. But anyway, he came up with this idea that we ought to improve people's ethics. Hey, I'm all for it. Let's go with it.
Thank you. Do you believe in taxation as a means for attaining equality?
No. And I could stop there, but attaining equality, as I said, half the people in this room are probably smarter than I am. Some of the women in the room, not too many, are more beautiful than I am. Very few in the room are older than I am. But anyway, how are we going to achieve equality? So we take all the people who are smarter than I am. Well, let's see now. Let's drive nails into your head until you're as stupid as I am. That's a good idea. Then we'll be equal. As I said, it's sort of it's a very simple-minded notion of ethics. It's, as I said, the schoolyard. It's what the 8-year-olds say to each other. That's not fair. That's not fair. By which they mean, if you've had any children, I'm losing. No, that's not fair. That's not fair. And we've got to get people to grow up and stop talking about. And in any case, as I argue in my forced writings, I didn't want to write on equality. I think forced equality. I think it's foolish. But I was forced to because of the popularity of this worry. The taxation doesn't work. Where there are proposals to increase the marginal rates of taxation in the United States for high-income people. Well, what do you know? When there were high rates, the rich people didn't pay them. What kind of naivete is it that people don't know that? They put their money in Panama. Come on. They're rich, so they hire lawyers and accountants, many of whom are here, to work out a way of not paying the taxes. In any case, arithmetically, it doesn't work out. And I show it. You take from the top, what was it that Oxfam had the top, I don't know, was 81 billionaires in the world, and you give that to the rest of the population, and it's 9 cents a day. 9 American cents a day. Well, okay, if you think that's not going to do it. What you need is modern economic growth. And if you learn nothing this morning, learn this. Since 1800 in Mexico and the United States and lots of other countries, real income per head for the poorest people has increased, now hear this, by a factor of 20 or 30. That, if you remember your 4th grade arithmetic, is about 2,000 or 3,000%, measured in conventional terms, without including improvements in quality. And it's not doubling, it's not tripling, it's 2,000%. 3,000%. I gave a talk on this at Cambridge, England, to the Department of Social Anthropology there, which is among the best in the world. And an anthropologist whom I admire very much, who got up at the end and said, well, I agree with your factor of 30. He's kind of a historical anthropologist. But 3,000%, that's way too much.
Talking about IQ.
Yeah, well, he had a lot of IQ, but it wasn't in an arithmetic direction. And that's the problem. If you want to make us equal, then you have to, you're better at arithmetic than I am, so let's get you to forget the multiplication table, and you're better at writing than I am, let's try to stop you from, blah, blah, blah.
And yet you can win an election saying that we're worse off.
Yeah, I know.
Last two questions, Oscar, and then we'll finish with Mariana. So we finish at 10 o'clock, 10 p.m.
Professor McCloskey, in the upcoming battle in Capitol Hill to ratify the USMCA, how to use this context in Washington in a polarized Congress with an anti-trade government to promote the idea not only of free trade, but of exchange, of integration in North America, and in general terms, the free exchange of ideas, of the North American idea. How to use this context, which will be rather complicated, rather tough to pass, to promote these ideas.
Here's what I'm hoping, and I think I would go so far as to predict that this stupid anti-trade, focusing on the balance of trade, which, by the way, is with Canada, he's got it all wrong. It's the other way around with Canada. But this silly talk. I mean, you have a balance of payments deficit with your grocery store, and I really hope that doesn't keep you up at night. And the wall. The famous wall. These stupid ideas will fade. Individual one will be in prison, as he deserves to be. He's a corrupt man right down to his fingertips. And I look forward to him being in an orange jumpsuit. And his family and friends will be there too. Okay, that's good. That, I think, will cause the peak of world populism. And I think it'll start to decline. But we've all got to work. We've all got to convince the artists and the intellectuals, the journalists, whatever, to start writing in favor of mutually advantageous exchange. There's a very good movie, Joy, about 6 years ago, about Joy Mangano, who invented the self-squeezing mop. You move it back and forth and it squeezes and the water comes out and you can do it again. And it's in favor of innovism.
An optimist, as you say in your book. Mariana, last question.
No, you know what? I'm actually going to pass the word to Tom.
Okay, Tom. The Saint Thomas, as we call it.
Thank you.
Saint Thomas.
I should just point out that was this book, Bourgeois Dignity, was just named one of the top 10 books in China in 2018. And it is having an impact, and it is changing minds.
God, I hope so.
So I wanted to mention something very quickly about Mexico and the relationship to the rest of the world. Because really people do look to Mexico. Mexico is a very important country, not only Latin America or the Americas, but around the world. And what happens here will have reverberations elsewhere. So I just flew from Kyrgyzstan. It's a long way from Bishkek to Mexico City, I have to say. But there, our liberal friends are working. They just succeeded in having open skies and competition in airlines better than the US. In this regard, they're pushing hard in difficult circumstances. In that situation between Russia and China, you can imagine what it's like. But this cause for liberalism is global. You are not alone. There are people on every continent. Atlas Network that I work with has partners in 95 different countries. And there's a common network. And we have one thing that the other side doesn't have. We don't hate each other. And that's really important. Because every kind of nationalism and populism hates the neighbors. And we're the only ones who believe we can live together through mutually beneficial exchange. We can live together peacefully. That is, in fact, a big advantage for the liberal ideas of the future.
I certainly agree.
I hope that people here in Mexico will push forward liberalism, not neoliberalism, which was an invention of the Castro brothers, which is a form of statism and craziness, but real, authentic liberalism, which is the society of free and equal persons.
Liber.
And just to end up with that thought, what you do here in Mexico is deeply important. The Americans in the US are watching, the Americans in Central and South America are watching, and really the whole world will look to Mexico and see how you handle this problem. So God bless you and good luck.
Absolutely. Can I just add to Tom's remarks? He's got an excellent book which you all ought to buy on all this, but the European intellectuals, the clerisy as I call them, the journalists and professors and so on, from the 1700s on, had three ideas. One was very good, and that was liberalism. The other two were very bad, and what we should be armed against, namely nationalism and socialism. And if you like nationalism and socialism, maybe you'll like National Socialism.
Well, I think that we have been privileged this morning. We have among ourselves one of the top scholars in the world. As an economist, a historian, an English professor, a communications professor, which is a rare combination of skills. Professor McCloskey will join the ranks of Douglas North and James Buchanan soon, as when she receives the Nobel Prize.
You may not be dead.
But also Friedrich Calle and other more worthy awardees. And we certainly hope that when you do that, you will coming back to Mexico.
I will for sure.
This is as Mariana said at the beginning, and Edna, this is your house.
I need mole.
And we need the strength of the ideas, because in the end, ideas not only underpin progress, but the right ideas in the end will win the debates, and I think the support of liberty, as Tom said, will underpin the future of Mexico. And most Mexicans, in spite of what you might get from media and opinion polls, are in favor of bettering their lives with their own efforts. True development is the development one person at a time. And Mexico is going to flourish because we're in the process of becoming a bottom-up society where we respect everybody in the same way, and then truly understand what Benito Juárez told us 150 years ago: the respect of other people's rights.
Here, here.
It's competitiveness. Thank you very much.